for the online art exhibition entitled True Image, celebrating the legacy of Yinyuan Longqi, or Ingen Ryūki, and the art of Ōbaku. First of all, I'd like to start out by introducing Professor Zhang Wu, who's professor in the Department of East Asian Studies and director of the University of Arizona, director of the Center for Buddhist Studies at the University of Arizona, sorry about that. Among his many areas of expertise, we can foremost include the history of late Ming Buddhism, within which he's written extensively on the Huangbo or Ōbaku school, which we'll talk about today. So, Dr. Wu.
Thank you very much. Thank you, James. Let me see. We have a couple of slides, by the way. I just want to say hello to everyone in person and also our online audience. So this is our first in-person event, right? After 2 years. So I'm so excited. So all of you have already arrived here and participate in our tea ceremony. That's wonderful, right? So we're grateful to the Sakura Tea Circle for making this available. So they already did their presentation. And by the way, James, you forgot to introduce yourself, right? So we have Dr. James Baskin here as a master of ceremony for today's event. And James has been a great help for us to organize this event. He's right now a senior fellow affiliated with the Center for Buddhist Studies and also lecturer in the Department of East Asian Studies. Thank you, James. So then that's me, right? So James already say a couple words of me. Thank you very much. By the way, I want to just once again welcome you and faculty, staff, student, friends, and the distinguished guests. And welcome to attend this launching ceremony of our Ōbaku Ingen online art exhibition. Remember the title, by the way. The title of this exhibition is True Image, right? If you know Chinese, it's 真相, right? What is true image? So it's really exciting. We want to see something real and authentic. So True Image, the subtitle is celebrating the legacy of Yinyuan Longqi. So this monk's name, and also he, if we pronounce in Japanese, is Ingen Ryūki. So I want all of us to remember his name in both Chinese and Japanese, and the subtitle, let me read it again, celebrating the legacy of Yinyuan Longqi or Ingen Ryūki and the art of Ōbaku. Ōbaku is a tradition he established in Japan. This exhibition is organized and hosted by the Center for Buddhist Studies at the College of Humanities, the University of Arizona, and has been assisted by a group of scholars, both Chinese and Japanese, and private collectors. My name, by the way, I don't want to introduce myself again, but I want to say I'm a host and a co-organizer of this exhibition. And also, I'm going to be the speaker later, right? So you're going to see me a lot today. But however, I want to just say throughout my academic career, I've made the research on Yinyuan and his Ōbaku tradition a lifetime pursuit. So I published a book for this monk. I'm also on behalf of the center's faculty and the staff, I would like to welcome you to join this online event. This event was first conceived 2 years ago, and it has been sponsored by Huangbo Monastery in Fuqing, China, and our Lingyin and Puyin Buddhist Studies lecture series. Later, the abbot of the rebuilt Huangbo Monastery in China, Venerable Dingming, will also speak to us as well. Here, I want to thank our donors and the collaborators for their generous support. 2022 is the 350th death anniversary of the Zen Master Yinyuan, right, also pronounced as Ingen in Japanese, who founded the Japanese Ōbaku tradition, and today is the day he passed away, actually, according to the Western calendar. If we calculate according to the lunar calendar, that's going to be the third day of the fourth month. Right, so for this year, it happened to be just 1 month after the lunar month, right? So that's today, exactly. So we plan to make him and his Ōbaku tradition the theme of our events during the coming year to celebrate his life and accomplishments in both China and Japan. An online exhibition of Ōbaku art is ready for us to view and will be unveiled during today's ceremony. A series of lectures by scholars and specialists will introduce him and his tradition to the public. In addition, a music concert featuring the Japanese Zen monk musician, Mr. Kanho Yakushiji, will be premiered online in October. Tea ceremony demonstrations, you already seen the matcha version here, in particular the sencha traditions. I want to mention Yinyuan, this monk brought another tea ceremony tradition to Japan, which is called sencha. And that sencha performance will be presented later in association with other events. Since we are here at the Poetry Center of College Humanities, it reminds me actually Yinyuan was also an accomplished poet. And we will collaborate with the Poetry Center to have a series of events about his poems. I want to also thank all people who have supported us during the process of preparation. I want to thank in particular our staff who are working with me and make these events happen. Our center staff member, Mario Cost, over there, and also Jackie Lear, right, and Jeffrey Liu over there. They have all worked with me closely and tirelessly. Thank you very much. Our College Humanities Dean's Office and external event team allow us to use this magnificent facility in the Poetry Center and assist us with live streaming. Thank you, Nate, over there. And please keep in mind that they have just completed a major event in our University of Arizona Outreach Center in Washington, D.C. last week. So I was there as well, right? So it's a big event for us. And just within a week, they made our event happening right now, right? So thank you very much, all of you, for your professionalism. Our Vice Dean, Kimberly Jones, over there, later will speak on behalf of the College Humanities, and our Durant's Dean, Alain Philippe Durant. So it's a lot of D's here, right? So right now, he has a new title as an endowed deanship donated by Jackie and Burnett Durance. And he already sent his best wishes to me and all of you. Right? And in addition, I want to thank our academic team for organizing and curating this online exhibition. It is not an easy task to put an online exhibition together, especially for a small center like ours with limited resources. The following scholars have worked with me in the past 2 years to bring this project to completion. They are the true heroes. Let me say a couple words about them. In addition to myself as a co-organizer, I have 2 other co-organizers. Dr. John Johnston, who is unable to join us. He's in Thailand right now. He's a senior fellow and helping us organize this exhibition. And also here, Dr. James Baskin here with us, also as a co-organizer. In addition, we have an advisory committee. So I want to mention their names here, all accomplished scholars in the field of Ōbaku art and history. Dr. Patricia Graham, Adjunct Research Associate, University of Kansas Center for East Asian Studies, and also Certified Appraiser of Asian Art. Dr. Elizabeth Scharf, Visiting Scholar in the Center for Japanese Studies at the University of California, Berkeley. Dr. Sinead Wilbar, Curator of Japanese Art from Cleveland Museum of Art. Dr. Harold Conrad, Chair of Modern Japanese Studies at the University of Dusseldorf, Director of Institute of Modern Japan. Dr. Stuart Katz, retired professor, Department of Psychology at the University of Georgia. Gary Ho, President, He Chuangshi Foundation for Calligraphy and Painting in Taiwan. Dr. Guohao Wu, Chief Curator and Researcher, also from He Chuangshi Foundation. Dr. Josh Sklatchat, our faculty here at the Department of East Asian Studies, also our member of Advisory Committee. We want to especially thank Dr. Patricia Graham and Dr. Elizabeth Scharf, who are going to speak later, for their substantial scholarly contribution to the development of art exhibition. In addition, we have an honorary advisor, who is Dr. Stephen Addis, who is in his senior age. So he's a pioneer in the study of Ōbaku art. He's a retired professor from University of Richmond. And in addition to the art exhibition, we also have a GIS and a story map project. We want to link art objects and Yinyuan's life journey in China, Japan together. So the GIS component will be installed and later this year. But here I want to thank our GIS advisors, Philip Stoker, a professor at the School of Landscape Architecture and Planning here at University of Arizona, Dr. Chris Lookinbill, a director of Geographical Information Systems Technology Programs, and also professor at the School of Geography Development and Environment, also here. In addition, we have a GIS coordinator, also our assistant, Jeffrey Liu, and it's Ling Wan. In addition, we have a content developer for the website, Dr. Jinhui Wu, who is a fellow here at the Center for Buddhist Studies. By the way, Dr. Wu, Jinhui Wu just accepted a job offer from Reed College at Portland as an assistant professor. So congratulations, Jinhui. And also, please join me thank our web designer, Catherine Layton, and also Ivan Bourgeois. Right? At the end, without further ado, let me announce the formal launching of our art exhibition called The True Image, celebrating the legacy of Yinyuan Longqi and the art of Ōbaku. Let's applause. So please keep this URL in mind as we will update our collection and exhibition constantly, and more events will be announced just on this website. URL is ingen.arizona.edu. Right? We go by his Japanese pronunciation. Ingen is very easy to remember, I-N-G-E-N. So if you remember that, it's going to be ingen.arizona.edu. So later, Dr. Patricia Graham and Betsy Scharf will speak about the website, but here just a couple of screenshots. So you have plenty of time later to explore by yourself. Right? And so after today's event, please take time, visit the site, and explore the exhibition rooms with your curiosity and questions, right? We would love to hear from you, and we'll organize virtual tours to provide in-depth guides to these art objects and their stories. Finally, I would like to wish you to remain prosperous and also healthy for the rest of the year. It has been another difficult year for all of us. We have had to endure all kinds of inconvenience and the health risk caused by the pandemic, both physically and mentally. And however, our perseverance and the resilience have become even stronger. The online exhibition is an example of our efforts to provide new opportunities through online interactions. We hope to create a wonderful in-person and online experience for all of you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Wu, for your words. Actually, Ingen in some ways is the most well-known Zen master indirectly because the word for green beans in Japanese, Ingen mame, comes from his name because he brought green beans as well as watermelon and as well as bamboo shoots. So he's quite, gastronomically speaking, he's quite, we owe him quite a debt in Japan. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Kimberly Jones, who is Vice Dean for Academic Affairs in the College of Humanities, as well as a professor of East Asian Studies. Her specialization is Japanese sociolinguistics. So Dr. Jones.
As if looking at me once wasn't enough, you get to see me twice. So hello and welcome everyone, honored guests, people who are joining us remotely, as well as everyone who's in person, students, staff, faculty, colleagues, friends, supporters. It's really great to have you all here today. Dr. Wu has been telling me about this event and the planning for this event for quite a while now, and so it's really exciting to see it coming to fruition. I'm happy to be able to welcome you on behalf of the University of Arizona's College of Humanities. Our dean, as Dr. Wu said, would be here, but he is out of town, unfortunately. So Dorrance Dean Durand became dubbed 3D AP on a recent trip that we took to Washington, D.C. But he does, as Zhang said, he sends his regrets and his welcome and his thanks for participating in this event. So as you've heard, under the leadership of the Center for Buddhist Studies, with the help of lots of friends and colleagues from around the country and around the world, we're launching now a year's worth of special events that are going to celebrate art, scholarship, music, poetry, tea ceremony that are associated with Yinyuan, or Ingen, as we say in Japanese. I should probably stick to that one because I can pronounce that one better. I was thinking the Center for Buddhist Studies is coming up on its 5th birthday, I believe. It's kind of hard to believe because in some ways it seems like it's only been a couple of years since it was established. I think that's probably partly a function of the pandemic brain fog that, I don't know about you folks, but somehow it seems like the last couple of years didn't happen. But then when I look on their website and I see all of the initiatives and all of the projects that they've been doing, I realize there's no way they could have accomplished all of that in a couple of years. And indeed, it's been 5 years. And now we're looking forward to another momentous step as we work towards and contemplate moving into a new space in the Andrew Wild Center for Integrative Medicine building. So we are planning for that and trying to make that become a reality. We're so glad that we have CBS in COH. The center fills a lot of different roles, and you're probably aware of this, but it's a source of support for both scholarly, academic endeavors and also for outreach endeavors. So faculty research, lecture series, student scholarships, conferences, and broadly working to preserve and to illuminate the Buddhist heritage in all of its various textual and artistic forms. The center collaborations cut across departments and colleges here at the University of Arizona, and also extend to both academic and non-academic communities in Tucson and obviously far, far beyond. So I think the events that we're setting in motion today are illustrative of most of those various sort of areas of initiatives, of projects that I mentioned. And thus, this is particularly a hallmark of the kind of activities that the Center for Buddhist Studies sponsors and supports. So once more, on behalf of the College of Humanities, I just want to thank you all so much for joining us at this very momentous event and getting ready to kick off these events. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. So we're going to move into our first video presentation, or the greetings from the Venerable Dingming. The Venerable Dingming is the abbot of the Huangbo Temple, and I should also mention that the Huangbo Temple is one of our main sponsors for this event, so they get a very warm thank you. For those of you online who are watching, you might want to check the translation, which should be in the Zoom chat, if you want to follow along with the English translation of the 3 presentations. And also, please feel free to visit cbs.arizona.edu, or the, yes, so it's also, there should be the translation there. So Venerable Dingming is the abbot of the Huangbo Temple in Fuqing, China. From 2001 to 2014, he studied at the Hebei Buddhist College, as well as the Chinese Buddhist Academy and the Beijing Institute of Buddhist Culture. From 2007 to March 2009, he served as the executive director of the Beijing Buddhist Association, the director of the Office of the Beijing Institute of Buddhist Culture, and supervisor of the Guanghua Temple in Beijing. He's been responsible for 3 major projects on Buddhism that deal with the areas of education and practice, research and Dharma promotion, as well as cultural studies. He's currently engaged in research on Zen Buddhism, its history, as well as Chinese Buddhism in its modern manifestation, as well as Sino-Tibetan Buddhist exchange. So we will start his presentation.
家学者、同学们、朋友们，大家吉祥。2022年是隐元禅师圆寂350年，中日美三国组织机构和高校在不同的时间节点举行各种纪念活动。此次我们中国福建黄埔山万福寺与美国亚利桑那大学佛教研究中心一同联合主办纪念隐元禅师的系列活动，时间跨度将从2022年5月到2023年5月。本次活动得以顺利举办，首先我要感谢老朋友吴江教授和他团队的策划与付出。去年吴江教授和我聊起，想以2022年隐元禅师圆寂纪念年，在亚利桑那大学举办黄渤文化系列主题活动。我认为这是极有学术远见的构想，应该给予支持，共襄盛举。隐元禅师是中日交流互鉴的文化符号，是推动中国文化国际性传播的代表性人物，是东亚文化交流史上的一座丰碑。以隐元禅师为核心的黄渤禅僧外附东渡传播的文化所形成的黄渤文化，对日本近世社会产生深远影响。柳田圣山曾说，近世日本社会的发展，不论从哪一方面，若离开了黄渤文化的影响，都无从解释。隐元禅师一生忠心古黄渤，创建新黄渤，跌宕壮阔，为亚洲文明交流互鉴谱写新篇章。自隐元禅师东渡创建新黄渤开始，共有16位黄渤法脉的禅师应邀担任新黄渤住持，时间长达近130年。被写入黄渤东渡僧宝传的著名禅师传法者近80位，100年间创建寺院多达1500多座。根据黄渤宗正录记载，黄渤宗的传法禅师共有4648位，其东渡人数之众，时间持续之长，空间跨度之广，文化传播种类之多元，世所少见，为中日两国交流互鉴做出历史性贡献。他们带起的先进文化、科学技术和佛学经义，对日本江户时期的经济社会发展产生的重要影响，为亚洲乃至世界文明交流做出卓越贡献。本次纪念隐元禅师的黄渤文化系列主题讲座，以吴江教授为首的8位专家学者，将从中国禅师隐元和东亚全球化、黄渤宗的书法艺术、黄渤宗的肖像画艺术、黄渤宗在日本的红传、黄渤宗的普茶料理、黄渤宗与日本煎茶道等形成主题，同时举办黄渤文化艺术线上展和黄渤线上音乐会。在此，我对各位专家学者和老师的精彩讲座表示衷心的感谢，因为有大家的参与和付出，可以让欧美乃至世界大众更多地了解黄渤，走进黄渤和感受黄渤这颗亚洲璀璨明珠的魅力。最后，我祝愿本次黄渤文化系列主题活动圆满成功，感谢各位的付出和参与，同时也真诚地邀请各国研究黄渤的专家、学者和国际友人参访中国福建古黄渤。感谢。
Our next speaker, do you have translation for that as well? Is the abbot the Venerable Kondo Hakudo, who is the abbot of the Manbokuji temple in Uji, Japan, which is the headquarters of the Ōbaku, the Huangbo school in Japan. That's the that heads over roughly 400 temples throughout the country. These are his greetings.
親愛なるご博士ほか気学仏教学研究所の皆様、起源は1996年北米マサチューセッツ州ケンブリッジにあるハーバード大学に留学され、宗教学の学位を取得され、その後アリゾナ州トゥースンにあるアリゾナ大学で20年にわたり仏教学研究所の設立に、誠意努力され、基本的事業を立ち上げられてこられました。そして令和4年2022年大幕宗祖隠元禅師350年大恩期に際し、多方面にわたる検証事業に取り組んでおられると聞いております。大幕宗文化殿では大恩期記念誌大幕山蓮学集田中主観編三来集の本国出版を予定しております。また小東大恩期法要は10月の1日から3日にかけて開催します。本年2月宮内庁より玄東大師の死号を下賜されましたことは謹んで報告をいたします。文化殿から報告によりますと、春と秋に文化殿特別展、滋賀漢方館特別展、立東歴史民族博物館大恩期企画展、神戸市立博物館大恩期企画展、長崎歴史博物館特別展が、またペンシルベニア州フィラデルフィア美術館でも大幕の書企画展が開催されるそうです。最後に宗門を代表して皆様各位のご多幸を念じます。第63代近藤白道合唱杯。
So our next speaker and our final virtual speaker, our video speaker, is Professor Sueki Fumihiko, who is one of the foremost scholars of Japanese Buddhism alive today. He's published many tens of books on everything from early Chinese and Japanese Buddhism to modern philosophy and nearly everything in between. From 1995 through 2009, he was a professor at the University of Tokyo. And from 2009 on, he's been a professor at the International Research Center for Japanese Studies in Kyoto. I was fortunate enough to be part of a research group that he headed, and it turned out to be one of the great learning experiences of my life. So without further ado, Professor
Sueki. 末木と申します。本年は日本に大幕宗を伝えた隠元禅師の350年の大恩期ということで、アリゾナ大学の仏教学研究所では記念のイベントを行うということですが、大変素晴らしいことです。隠元禅師は1673年4月3日に亡くなりました。82歳でした。隠元禅師は福建省の出身で、福建省にある有名な大幕山満福寺の住職を務めていましたが、日本の求めに応じて1654年に来日しました。当時日本はいわゆる鎖国が完成して、中国やオランダとの貿易は長崎に限定されていました。長崎の唐人屋敷には多くの中国人が住んでいましたが、 彼らのために中国風のお寺が3つありました。隠元禅師はその中で宗福寺や興福寺で指導にあたりましたが、その評判は高く、大勢の僧や学者が指導を受けにやってきました。そこで摂津、今の大阪ですがの不問寺というところの住職に招かれまして、さらに将軍家綱と会見することになりました。こうして山城の国の宇治に土地を賜り、1661年に中国のお寺と同じ名前の大漠山満福寺を改装いたしました。隠元禅師は明代に盛んになった新しい仏教をもたらしました。中世後半から近世へかけての日本の仏教は次第に宗派的になり、それぞれの宗派の僧は自分の宗派の教学を学んで、それぞれの宗派の実践を行いました。そこでは禅宗は禅だけ、浄土宗は念仏だけというように、その学問や実践が限定されてしまいました。そこに因縁によってもたらされた新しい明代の仏教はそれとは全く逆に総合的なものでした。禅と念仏、不流文字と経典論、どれをも包摂し、それだけでなく仏教に限らない新しい中国文化をもたらしました。例えば今日日本で普通に飲むお茶は抹茶ではなく煎茶ですが、これもまた因縁がもたらしたものです。満福寺はその後も中国人が住職を務めるという特殊な性格を維持しましたが、日本人も多く因縁に入門してその教えを継承しました。日本人の因縁の弟子としては鉄牛道紀とか長音道海などが有名ですし、また大漠山大漠版鉄元版とも言われますが、その大蔵経を出版した鉄元道光も、あるいはまたその普及に努めた両道覚も因縁に学んでいます。鉄牛は下総の国で干拓事業を行い、また鉄元も飢饉の時には救済に尽くすなど、大漠の僧は非常に社会活動も活発に行いました。さらに近世の批判的な仏教教学の研究で有名な華厳宗の宝丹宗宗は鉄元の弟子であり、やはり大漠の系統を受けています。また煎茶道を普及させたこういうバイサオこういう外もよく知られています。このように近世仏教の多様な傾向がいずれも大漠を起源としています。ここで大漠版の大蔵経と少し関連しまして、私自身が調査に関わった東京大学の総合図書館にあります明の万暦版あるいは過去大蔵経に少し触れてみます。この大蔵経は実はほとんど調査もされずに図書館に眠っていたものですが、たまたま私のところの留学生が見つけて調べてみたところ、先ほど申しました両道覚が江戸の瑞祥寺というお寺に寄贈したものであることが分かりました。瑞祥寺は当時は鉄牛因縁の皇帝でありますが、その鉄牛が住職をしていました。そこで両は夢のお告げで調合しました金丹円という薬で大儲けをしまして、その儲けで各地のお寺に 大幕版の大蔵経を寄贈したのですが、大幕版が完成する前には3部ほどこの明の万暦版の大蔵経を寄贈していまして、その一つが東大に伝わったものです。この大蔵経は今日では全てデジタル化しておりまして、いわゆるSAT という大蔵経のデータベースからリンクされております。このように思わぬところで大幕の因縁の門下の活動の一端が明らかにされることになりました。このように因縁の影響は非常に多くの方面に残されていまして、その活動に焦点を当てることはとても意義の大きいことです。今回のアリゾナ大学の仏教学研究所のイベントが成功することを期待しております。どうもありがとうございました。
Thank you to Professor Soeki. Every time he talks, I feel a unique nostalgia from very good times. Okay, so the next speaker will be Dr. Patricia Graham, who's an adjunct research associate at the University of Kansas Center for East Asian Studies, and she's also a certified appraiser of Asian art, as well as the author of a book I've made extensive use of, Tea of the Sages, Sencha, which is the first book in English devoted to the culture of Sencha, loose leaf tea, and its aesthetic culture. So, Professor Graham.
Hello, I'm very pleased that John Wu invited me to participate in this project commemorating Ingen on this significant anniversary that marks 350 years since his passing, and I'm thrilled to be able to introduce you to the online exhibition component of this project today. First, I want to thank Professor Wu and the Center for Buddhist Studies at the University of Arizona for taking the initiative to undertake this project. Second, I want to thank all the members of the Advisory Steering Committee whose collective wisdom has made it possible. And third, thanks are owed to all the museums and private collectors who gave permission for their art to be included. This exhibition was conceived to highlight Ōbaku-related arts outside Japan, which our recent research found are significant in number. Our online exhibition, therefore, features fine representative examples only and is not by any means comprehensive. These materials outside Japan are generally not included in the many exhibitions of the art, indeed the many arts, of Ōbaku in Japanese museums. Therefore, we hope that this project, which is designed to be a repository of data on these materials, will become an important resource for people engaged in the study of Ōbaku arts, especially the many extant works of painting and calligraphy by major masters associated with Ingen and his monastic community. Before I talk about the conception for this exhibition, I'd like to give you a little background about the history of the study of Ōbaku arts, which, as you will see, is a relatively recent phenomenon. Prior to this exhibition, there have only been 2 other exhibitions held outside of Japan that focused exclusively on Ōbaku arts. The first took place when I was a graduate student at the University of Kansas. It was one of the inaugural exhibitions at the university's new Helen Forsman Spencer Museum of Art in the spring of 1978. The second exhibition was held at the Art Museum of the University of Hong Kong in 1989 and featured the private collections of 3 prominent Kyoto art dealers. The Kansas exhibition was organized by my graduate school professor, Stephen Addis, who had just started teaching there the previous autumn. This exhibition, Ōbaku Zen Painting and Calligraphy, was drawn from 18 public and private lenders in the US and featured 38 works of art. The show traveled to New Orleans Museum of Art later that year. Steve Addis inspired my subsequent research on this topic and that of many other scholars in the U.S. The 1978 exhibition also stimulated the interest in Ōbaku of many institutions and private collectors, as well as dealers, including Fred and Joan Bakeland in New York and Paul Moss in London. Paul Moss held an exhibition of Ōbaku arts in 2014 that was accompanied by a publication. From the 1980s, these dealers, among the others in the West, began selling Ōbaku paintings and calligraphies to Western collectors. In Japan, efforts to study Ōbaku arts began in earnest only in the 1970s and were spearheaded by studies undertaken by scholars at the Ōbaku head temple Manpukuji, whose museum, the Bunkaden, had opened there in 1973. My own study of these materials has been immeasurably enhanced by the encouragement and assistance of these two scholars at the Bunkaden. It was in the 1970s that the first scholarly publications of Ōbaku arts appeared in Japan. The Manpukuji Bunkaden published these 5 volumes in addition to an annual journal, Ōbaku Bunka, or Ōbaku Culture, that began in 1973, the year the Bunkaden opened. Over the years, it featured invaluable scholarly articles on Ōbaku arts and architecture. Manpukuji was also included in the seminal series on Japanese temples, Koji Junrei, Pilgrimages to Old Temples, and this publication remains an important resource today. Major Ōbaku art exhibitions in Japan, apart from those at the Bunkaden, took place beginning in 1991. That year, a groundbreaking exhibition on Ōbaku painting and calligraphy was held at the Kobe City Museum. It was followed by another fine exhibition at the Gifu City Museum in 1992. But it was the 1993 exhibition at the internationally renowned venue of the Kyoto National Museum that encouraged widespread interest in Ōbaku arts. This outstanding exhibition was accompanied by an important scholarly symposium. Exhibitions were on hold until 2004, when a spate of them opened at various Japanese museums. The most important was held in 2014 at the Kyushu National Museum in commemoration of the 350th anniversary of the founding of Manpukuji. This brings us to the present. Beginning in this year, marking the 350th anniversary of Ingen's death, there are grand celebrations and exhibitions being held both in Japan and China. The University of Arizona Center for Buddhist Studies project is part of this worldwide effort to commemorate Ingen's legacy and the founding of the Ōbaku lineage in Japan. Our exhibition is organized into 5 sections we call rooms. Room 1, Ingen and Ōbaku Zen lineage ancestors. Room 2, Ingen's disciples. Room 3, artists and poets. Room 4, Arhat imagery. And Room 5, traces of Huangbo Ōbaku temples. We conceived this organization as a guide for viewers to the activities of Ingen and his predecessors in China, to the introduction of their style of Zen Buddhism and its spread in Japan, and finally, to demonstrate the broad and lasting cultural impact of Ōbaku in Japan, where fascination with Chinese culture at the time of Ingen's arrival had created an opportunity for his lineage to flourish. Room 1, Ingen and Ōbaku Zen lineage ancestors, opens the exhibition with images and calligraphic scrolls by Ingen and his predecessors. Room 2, Ingen's disciples, features portraits and calligraphy by Ingen's principal disciples. Room 3, Artists and Poets, includes arts inspired by Chinese literati culture brought to Japan by Ōbaku monks, including the erudite pastimes of composing Chinese poetry, brushing ink paintings and calligraphy, and partaking of rice wine and steeped green tea. It also features paintings by lay followers of Ōbaku, on whose artworks Ōbaku monks frequently composed verses. Room 4, Arhat imagery, highlights one of the most enduring legacies of Ōbaku in Japan, the widespread, to this day, popularity of Arhat imagery. Arhats, or Lohan in Chinese, and Rakan in Japanese, were legendary disciples of the Buddha who were thought to dwell anonymously among the living. The most famous Ōbaku temples to feature their representations in 18 or 500 groupings were Manpukuji itself and the Tokyo temple of the 500 Rakan, or Gohyaku Rakanji. This temple was attacked during the Buddhist persecution of the late 19th century. Its famous statues were damaged and many were removed, with some finding their way to collections outside of Japan. Another famous Kyoto temple, Sekihoji, has a charming garden populated with stone statues of the 500 Arhats that lay Ōbaku monk and painter Jakuchu designed and commemorated in paintings of the subject. Room 5, Traces of Huangbo Ōbaku temples, features artists who created pictorial images of Huangbo Ōbaku temples as well as temple building signboards. The signboards are remnants of the temples themselves, removed and sold off to raise money for building repairs or when temples changed sectarian affiliations or were closed. We hope you enjoy the exhibition and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Graham. It truly is I encourage all of you to look at the website and enjoy it, take your time with it. It's really, the work behind it is a testament to the people who, Dr. Graham and Dr. Scharf, but it's really quite striking. So I highly suggest that you take your time with it. Our next speaker is Dr. Scharf. Besides being a visiting scholar at the Center for Japanese Studies at the University of California, Berkeley, she also is a specialist on Ōbaku art. She's researched and written extensively on Ōbaku Zen portrait painting and its Sino-Japanese heritage. So, Dr. Scharf.
Greetings, everyone. I'm so happy to be a part of this wonderful project. My name is Elizabeth Scharf, and I'm an historian of Japanese art. In the past, I've researched portrait paintings of Ōbaku abbots and surveyed the subject of Chinese, Japanese, and Korean Buddhist portraits. I am honored to help the Center for Buddhist Studies commemorate Ingen's 350th death anniversary, and I especially look forward to visiting the University of Arizona in the fall to give a lecture on the surprising variety of portraits of Ingen surviving in Japan. Today, I would like to offer my congratulations to Professor Zhang Wu and the Center for Buddhist Studies for initiating this project and to express my gratitude for this opportunity. I first began studying portraits of Ōbaku abbots for my dissertation. This was back in the mid-1980s, and I had a lot to learn about the subject. I was drawn to Ōbaku through my fascination with the figure paintings of Ike Taiga, who was a celebrated 18th century Japanese painter. As a child, Taiga performed calligraphy at Manpukuji, Ōbaku's headquarters temple, and was praised as a prodigy by the Chinese abbot at that time. Then, as an adult, he painted the celebrated sliding door paintings of the 500 Arhats there. These are today preserved in the Kyoto National Museum. Arhats, the legendary disciples of the Buddha, are ubiquitous in Ōbaku temples. Yet here was a painter, one more widely known for his Chinese-style literati subjects than for his Buddhist subjects, painting a major work of Buddhist art. I recently learned that scholars now believe Taiga painted these wall panels in 1772 on the 100th anniversary of Ingen's death. Following Taiga in the 18th century, I have also developed a connection to Ōbaku culture. I have never lost my fascination with Ingen and the community he created so long ago in Japan. I urge you too to enjoy all the events of this 21st century celebration, especially the online exhibition. There, a wide variety of objects are on display: delicate ink paintings, quickly brushed works of calligraphy, colorful portrait paintings, realistic sculptures, and exciting woodblock prints. From monochrome ink to bright colors, the sense of vitality in Ōbaku works of art is inexhaustible and brings us closer to a tradition of Buddhism that came to our attention relatively recently, especially if we compare the past 50 years of the modern study of Ōbaku to the 350 years since Ingen passed away, or to the great antiquity of Ingen's spiritual lineage going back to the historical Buddha. Before I close, I'd like to commend Professor Wu for choosing a particularly apt or appropriate, very nearly perfect exhibition title, True Image, or Shinso in Japanese. True image is a compound of the Chinese characters for truth, shin, and image, aspect, or physiognomy, so. In its everyday sense, the compound means portrait. In Chinese, this was one of many terms used for portraits of Zen abbots since the medieval period in China. A true image of a person is ordinarily thought of as one that exhibits a certain degree of fidelity to nature. The portraitist tries to make the portrait subject recognizable to capture a likeness. Yet, in the Zen tradition, and this is not only Ōbaku, but the Zen tradition in general, the term gave monks the opportunity to highlight the conundrum of creating something that captures the full or true reality of a person, including his spiritual being, and something so material as a portrait. For example, in the portrait of Ingen in the exhibition, he has white hair and his face is full of wrinkles. He is portrayed as he likely appeared in his late years. Yet, although the portrait captures something of Ingen's physical likeness, and even his sentience or presence, as Ingen's senior disciple Mokuan writes in the eulogy, quote, "This portrait is not true," unquote. Here, Mokuan is employing a familiar play on words long used by Zen monks for portrait eulogies of Zen abbots. As Mokuan wrote on Ingen's portrait, quote, "Holding his stick, he points directly to man, yet originally without form. This portrait is not true. His form cannot be seen as form." And it goes on. In other words, quote, "This portrait is not a portrait." As scholars of Zen have explained, quote, "The true image of the master should not be sought in his form, but rather in the formless Buddha nature itself." And with that insight, I will leave you to enjoy the day's festivities. Thank you again for this delightful opportunity.
Okay, thank you to Dr. Scharf. That is our final presentation of virtual presentation.
So I need to read this list.
Oh, sure, okay.
Okay, by the way, thank you, James, Professor Scharf and Professor Graham already introduced the exhibition. By the way, I just have a list of lending institutions. I think I feel obligated to read the name, the list, because in my introductory remark, I don't have time to read all of that. Because we have been contacting lots of the institutions, art museums, for example, and I think we need to acknowledge their contribution. In particular, I think Dr. John Johnson, I mentioned he cannot be here. He's in Thailand right now. He did all the work contacting museums, keeping records. We asked permissions, by the way. By the way, all the art objects here online, we have acquired permissions from private collectors and also public art institutions. I want to read their names here. We're grateful to the following institutions and individuals who generously supplied images and image rights for this special presentation. Berkeley Art Museum and the Pacific Film Archive, collections of Harold Conrad, and a collection of Stuart Kotz, and the Detroit Institute of Arts, Gilton Yellin Foundation, Gilter Yellin Collection, Herbert Johnson Museum of Art, He Chuangshi Calligraphy Foundation, Los Angeles County Museum of Art, Minneapolis Museum of Art, National Gallery of Victoria, Melbourne, and let me turn to the next page. Philadelphia Museum of Art, St. Louis Art Museum, Spencer Museum of Art, University of Kansas, Freer Gallery of Art, and Arthur Sackler Gallery, the Smithsonian's National Art of Asian Art. So I was there last week. So they are having a exhibition on Zen art as well. The Art Institute of Chicago and the Cleveland Museum of Art, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, University of Michigan Museum of Art. Thank you. Thank all these lending institutions who allow us to use their images to make this online exhibition possible. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so our next speaker will be Dr. Albert Welter, who is a department head of East Asian Studies and a professor in the department. He's a specialist of Chinese Buddhism, in particular focusing on late Tang through the Song Dynasty. So, Dr. Welter.
Great. It's great to be here. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah, okay, good. I guess I should start by saying I think I'm maybe the last appetizer before the main course. And so I want to make my remarks fairly brief. I mean, it's been very interesting so far, all the different people that we've heard speak. I mean, I've been really enchanted to hear everyone. But let me extend my warmest welcome to all of you on the occasion of this event, the tea ceremony, which for those online preceded this event, the Ōbaku Ingen lecture, which we're going to hear from Professor Wu, and the information about the online art exhibition. This is really a colossal achievement. I mean, I really want to congratulate Professor Wu and his team of associates, all the people that you mentioned. It's I think this is a noteworthy event that will be remembered for a long time to come for the information that you've brought together. So, and this marks the beginning of a series of commemorative events for Chan or Zen Master Yinyuan or Ingen of the Ōbaku Zen School. And Professor Wu and others will speak at length during this series, starting with Professor Wu tonight, about Ingen and Ōbaku, and I'm looking forward to learning from them about this celebrated master. I'm reminded of my own connections, however tenuous, to today's topic. I did an MA thesis many years ago on the thought of Tang Master Ōbaku, Huangbo in Chinese, the founder from whom the Ōbaku lineage takes its name. And also recall that Ōbaku or Huangbo occasioned the enlightenment experience of Linji Yishuan or Rinzai. And the Rinzai lineage is one of the most important Zen lineages in Japan. So this importance of Ōbaku can't really be underestimated, especially for the Zen traditions and Zen in Japan. And as Professor Sueki, I think, alluded to in his remarks, though, that when Ingen came to China and brought Ōbaku, or Ingen went to Japan and brought Ōbaku to Japan in the 17th century, it was really a shock to Japanese Zen at the time, which was drawn along very strict sectarian lines, and the combined practice of Zen and Pure Land was deemed heretical at the time. And so, this was, this was one of the main practice of the Ōbaku tradition that was coming from China that Ingen brought. So it really brought a revolution to Japan and not necessarily appreciated revolution at the time, but it certainly was very noteworthy. The global connections that Chan in China, Zen in Japan, and Son in Korea are founded upon are central to Ingen's identity and remembered to this day. So Ingen's identity as a Buddhist master is predicated on the connections between China and Japan, well established prior to Ingen, and even going back to the origins of major traditions in Japan itself. Kukai, the founder of Shingon Buddhism, Saicho, the founder of Tendai Buddhism, both spent years in China studying the traditions they eventually founded in Japan. And the roster of famous monks who plied the waters between China and Japan are too numerous to mention. Needless to say, they were instrumental to the religious and cultural transmission that sustained East Asian Buddhism. Even the tea ceremony that was enjoyed here earlier today is testimony to that cultural transmission. Myoan Eisai, or Yosai, regaled as the first Japanese monk to bring Zen transmission to Japan, which, as important as that was, probably even more significant was his transportation of Song Dynasty Chinese tea culture to Japan, particularly the matcha, or powdered tea that remains so prized to the present day and which was enjoyed here today. His follower, N.A. Benen, was also instrumental in transferring tea culture from China to Japan. He studied at Jingshan Monastery outside Huangbo, and inspired by the architecture of this major Chan monastery of the Song Dynasty period, returned to Japan to build Tofukuji, one of the major Zen monasteries in Kyoto. Lest we think that the transfer was only one way, I was reminded of a time, that when I went to I'm drawing a blank here. Jingshan in outside of Hangzhou, and which was just rebuilt, in the last decade or so. It had been destroyed, as many places in China had been, and I was explained to me that when they rebuilt it, what did they do? They went to Tofukuji in Kyoto and studied, because Tofukuji was built on the model of Jingshan. So they looked at the model of Tofukuji and brought it back. And I can tell you, when I was sitting there, the first impression I had is I thought, oh my God, I'm in Kyoto. Because it's got the Song Dynasty aesthetic rather than the Ming or Qing aesthetic of most Chinese Buddhist monasteries today. It's got the kind of the white walls and the bare wood kind of aesthetic, which is very much associated, interestingly, with a Japanese aesthetic today, but it originated in Song Dynasty China. I also got to experience there that they were reestablishing the tea ceremony at Jingshan, again to kind of capitalize on this connection between Tofukuji in Kyoto and Jingshan in outside Hangzhou. Well, obviously I could go on, but I fear that I've already gone on too long, and I'm standing in the way of the wonderful talk you're going to hear today. I look forward to it, and also to the other presentations in the series to follow. Once again, welcome. Thank you for being here. Let's welcome Professor Wu.
Thank you, Albert, for this wonderful introduction. So I really feel difficult to accept this as a main course, right? So my talk, the last event, I think the real main course is outside because the food has been prepared, and later we're going to have a reception. So right now, I think I'm the only obstacle between you and the food. But however, I feel really excited to be able to give this talk. I feel I didn't have enough chance to give this talk on campus. I have been giving talks all over the world for many different audiences, but I don't remember I actually talk about what I really study, right? I mean, really study throughout so many years. That's this monk called Yinyuan or Ingen. So I wrote a book I mentioned. That book took me like 15, 20 years to complete, part of my dissertation. And so it's special. That feels special for me. And by the way, for today's talk, I have a written script I can read, but given the time limit, I'm not going to read all of that. But I think I have a pre-recorded version, by the way, which is the fuller version. Later, we're going to edit that and put online so you can hear the full version. But for now, I'm going to read a shorter version, right? So just to remember, we have the real main course outside. Okay. So today I'm going to talk about Yinyuan. And I want to mention this year is the 350th death anniversary. We all know about that. About Yinyuan, right? And we have this magnificent portrait of him. He went to Japan in the 1654 and started a splendid cultural tradition called Ōbaku. So this is how it has been written in the Chinese character. And this tradition has been alive, is still alive today. A few weeks ago, the Japanese emperor just gave a new title to this monk, honorific title to commemorate his contribution called Gento in Japanese, Yentong in Chinese. A series of memorial event has been held actually in China, Japan, and here, United States, North American, we are the cultural institution who sponsored this event. Master Yinyuan lived from the 1592 to 1673. His full name is Ingen Longqi. That's 4 Chinese characters. Longqi is his Dharma name, right? And Yinyuan is his literary name. He was born in Fuqing, a coastal town in southwest China. He went to Japan when he was already 62 years old, so quite senior when he went to Japan. In 1661, a new temple called Mampuguji, so that's the temple in Japan, was erected in Kyoto, Japan, named after Yinyuan's home monastery at Mount Huangbo. Right? So the same Chinese character can be pronounced either way in Chinese, Japanese. So basically, if you look at the Chinese character, both in China and Japan, they're the same. They're the same. So what Yinyuan did is just name the new temple in Japan after his home temple in China. In the late 17th century and the early 18th century, based in this new temple in Uji, and the Ōbaku school spread its influence throughout Japan. After the founding of the Temple of Japan, Yinyuan lived in retirement, actually. He lived the last 10 years in retirement and passed away at age 82. Before I tell you the detail about his life, Zen teaching and the practice, that's actually the main focus of my talk. I'm not going to talk about the art. I'm not an art historian, but I know him, his work, his Zen teaching and the practice. So I want to give you some historical background about the early modern East Asia. So that's the time period he lived into, which is roughly the 17th and 18th century. Many books have been written about East Asian history in this period. However, very few of them consider the role of religion. So I think that's why Yinyuan is important for scholarship, is that we want to know what's the role of religion. So we tend to call this time period 17th century crisis. A lot of things happened. I don't have time to mention all of them, but you can name a few. There's lots of disasters, right? Political, economic fiascos in China, Japan, Korea as well. Climate changes. Keep in mind, these climate changes people call the Little Ice Age happened exactly this time period, maybe contributing to the political fall, Ming Dynasty, for example, right? And also the famine, right? This caused lots of problems for people's livelihood. And Japan's invasion of Korea happened around this time. Regime changes, fall of the Ming Dynasty, the Manchu conquest of China, the founding of the Tokugawa Bakufu, it all happened in the beginning of the 17th century. The world also became global at that time. If you think about the world itself, the Westerners came to the East. The American continent was discovered. European merchants came to Asia. They bring in goods, produce, silver, right? A lot of silver from South American, kind of disrupting the financial system in East Asia. So Ming Dynasty went bankrupt, right? Because their inflation, because of the discovery of America. And also the Jesuits, religion, in terms of religion, missionaries came. So the Jesuits arrived in Japan first. They said, okay, so better go to China because, Chinese, they should know about Christianity. So people went to China, but there's a lot of interesting story. They start to spread the religion, not only in China, Japan, also Tibet as well. The Jesuits went to Tibet. Put all this together, you can see this is a very exciting time period in the 17th century. And Yinyuan, he lived at a time of crisis. And Buddhism, by the way, showed incredible growth in China. Right? On the contrary of all this disastrous crisis, Buddhism showed momentum. And Yinyuan was part of this kind of a momentum, right? So that's why he's not alone. My point is that he's not alone. So Yinyuan grew up in a time of crisis in the modern East Asia. He received his Chan training in Eastern Zhejiang, actually. So that's Dr. Albert Walter mentioned. We have Hangzhou, mentioned Hangzhou many times. That's the center of this Eastern Zhejiang culture. And which is one of the most developed area, the homeland of many intellectuals, such as Wang Yangming, right? By the way, I listed a couple of crises, right? So here I have a laundry list, right? So no time to mention. But this is one of the major Ming Dynasty philosopher, intellectual, and hailed from this region. And Yinyuan was deeply immersed in the literary culture of his time and learned the skill of calligraphy and poetry writing. So you probably have been surprised by how rich the cultural tradition he brought to Japan. Right? The reason is that he was brought up in this cultural kind of environment. He had participated actively in the Chan dispute concerning the meaning of enlightenment and authentication of Dharma transmission. I'm going to say more later about this. He claimed actually he inherited the authentic transmission of the Lingji sect. Right? If you look closely at the painting art objects, they have a seal stamped on the art object, which says they are coming from the authentic transmission of Lingji sect with their generation numbers. For Yinyuan Longqi, he considered himself 32 second generation of the Lingji transmission. So this is very, very significant for their self-identity. His career was interrupted by the Manchu invasion in 1644. So 1644, remember that day, Beijing was captured by the Manchu army, but the South still in control of Zheng Chenggong's power, right? And he became supporter of the resistance movement led by the legendary military leader called Zheng Chenggong. He was known in Japan as well as Koshinga because he was born in Japan, by the way. His mother was Japanese. And so the Zheng Chenggong defeated the Dutch and conquered Taiwan. So if you know part of Taiwan history, that's because Zheng Chenggong, he went to Taiwan, conquered Taiwan. And he was famous in the Western shores as Koshinga. In Edo period, he was famous in Japan as well. So he gave Yinyuan permission. So what happened is that he allowed Yinyuan to sail to Japan because the connection between Zheng Chenggong and Japan, so there was constant trade between China and Japan at the time. So I want to focus on different topics here. First, let's look at the Yinyuan in China. What happened when he lived in China? He lived actually most of the time in China, 62 years. To know Yinyuan better, we need to start from his youth and trace his journey from China to Japan. Yinyuan was born in a small village called Donglin, right? So I visited this place a couple of years ago, which was located in Lingde Town in Fuqing. Fuqing is a county, by the way. So then there are different townships, and Yinyuan was born in one of them. His secular name is Lin Zhengbing, right? We know pretty well his lineage. A few years ago, I did a few research in his hometown, and I found his ancestry tombs, right? So I have a couple of pictures here, shrines, right? Temples, all preserved very well. And a young man Yinyuan developed his spirituality at a very early age. He was often puzzled by the mystery of the universe. He was not very interested in secular affair. Rather, he showed his interest in religion. So he was interested in religion long when he was very kind of a little. So he experienced psychological crisis in his adolescence because his father was missing during a trip to do business. His father disappeared in the Hubei area when Yuan was little. The lack of a father figure in his youth must have left an empty space in Yuan's mind and had a significant impact when he grew up. At the age of 20, he showed no interest in marriage, so that's the time when Chinese men need to be married. So the excuse he found is that he needs to fulfill his filial piety. He never saw his father, so he wanted to find his father. So he just went to travel. Of course, it's no way to find his father, but that trip led him to Buddhism, right? Because he went to Puto Island. So as lots of pilgrims at that time, they visit Puto Island, which was believed to be the place of Bodhisattva Avalokitesvara, Guan Yin. And the Puto Island was considered the most sacred mountain of Bodhisattva Guan Yin in East Asia, not only in China, in Japan as well. So by the way, it's facing Japan. It's very close to Huangbo as well. It's all in the same area. So as a pilgrim, Yuan was deeply impressed by the power of Guan Yin and decided to become a monk after his visit, right? So that's the trigger why he became a monk. So in 1620, Yuan went to Mount Huangbo. So that's the local. He was from the local area. So he went to Huangbo and was formally ordained as a Buddhist monk. His early monastic career was typical of those monks who lived during the time. So as a young monk, he was drawn to Buddhism because of his piety to the Buddha and the Guan Yin cult. Puto is about the Guan Yin. So after becoming a monk, he immersed himself in monastic learning and literary training. So remember, I didn't say Zen or Chan, right? So this came much later. So in the beginning, he just like any other monk studied scripture, learning. So in his adult life, the rise of Chan Buddhism. So Chan Buddhism kind of rose up, and he was attracted to that. And he started to monastic training with scripture studies. By the way, I just want to mention a couple of scriptures because we study Buddhist canon as well. So anything about written words, texts, we're really interested. So these are a kind of a short list of the texts he was familiar with, probably not himself, but all the other young monks, novices. So they study scriptures like Scripture of Buddha's remaining teaching, Yi Jiao Jing, Nirvana Sutra, Diamond Sutra, Lotus Sutra. So these are really popular. However, after several years study, he became increasingly impatient with tedious scholastic tradition. So this is going to take you a lot of time, taking a PhD exam, right? So become a PhD, 6-10 years, for example. He doesn't like that. So I'm here kind of explaining why he later turned to Zen, Chan Buddhism. That appears to be easier, right? Shortcut, right? So that's probably the reason. I don't know, but that may be a trigger again. He felt the scripture study only show people the way rather than lead them onto the way. So this is what he said. So they just show the way because it's on paper, right? So in the book, but he want to practice. So want re-enlightenment, right? Rather than just read books, study. And in his opinion, years of study were senseless, doesn't make sense, for being released from cycle and the birth and the death. If you think about this religion, Buddhism, so people want to reach nirvana, right? So then what happened is release from birth and death, right? So he want to find a real teacher. So then he find his teacher. So this teacher called Mi Yuan Wu, right? By the way, this painting also belongs to the Ōbaku portrait painting. So it has been brought to Japan, and the Japanese painters, they model the Chinese style. So they paint this in Japan as well. So very vivid. And also later, I think Dr. Elizabeth Scharf is going to explain more because you can see some clear influence from the Western tradition because the facial features are so vivid and the perspectives being introduced. Or remember I mentioned Jesuits, they were there. So the Jesuits brought Western painting techniques to Eastern Zhejiang area. So the Chinese painters learn from the Jesuits and the Japanese painters learn from the Chinese. So we have this kind of magnificent portrait painting. So he was Yinyuan was later enlightened by Mi Yuan Wu. So I'm going to talk about his enlightenment experience, right? So this is something I think I can tell the story, how he was enlightened. He seriously believed he was enlightened, right? So the because Yinyuan care about genuine enlightenment experience. So they want to be enlightened and hope his experience can be authenticated by a qualified teacher through personal encounter and the Dharma transmission, right? Let me repeat this. A couple of things are very, very important here. So one is you have an enlightened experience, okay, but you have to find a teacher to authenticate, right? So there you have to introduce objective criteria to judge, right? So your experience. So you need a teacher. And also through personal encounter, you need to meet the teacher in person, right? And eventually you get a certificate, right? So you need a certificate in writing saying, okay, your enlightenment experience is valid. So now you become the 32nd generation of Lingji transmission. Right, so you need that kind of a certification. So these elements are very important. They brought this to Japan, right? So this idea, they brought it to Japan. So Mi Yun, right, at that time I mentioned his teacher was the major Lingji master at that time who revived the Chan Buddhism in the 17th century. He was particularly famous for using the Chan technique of beating and shouting. Right? If you know Tang Dynasty Buddhism, Lingji, for example, what he was famous for is actually beating and shouting. Right? So in his recorded sayings, he did that. But in the late Ming Dynasty, nobody have seen people did that, but people have texts. All those being recorded, and then people start to perform. So they beat people for real. Right? So at this time, it's not on paper. So they beat people for real. So then this is Mi Yuanwu, this guy, right? So on the screen. So under the tutelage of Mi Yuanwu, he went, by the way, Mi Yuanwu presided over Tiantong Monastery in Ningbo, right? So Ningbo, by the way, is another important town, city of Zen Buddhism. So Yinyuan claimed to have attained the enlightenment experience. Based on his experience, he later received Dharma transmission from Fei Yin Tongrong, right? Fei Yin Tongrong, by the way, received transmission from Mi Yuanwu. And he received transmission from Fei Yin Tongrong because it's so crowded. Mi Yuan already got 12 disciples. He said enough. So I'm not going to give out transmission anymore. So his 12 students keep giving transmission. So Yinyuan Longqi actually was the second generation, well, I think after Mi Yuanwu. So they form a three kind of generations. So you're going to see from the Ōbaku portrait painting, very often three being portrayed together, showing a continuity, right? And I mentioned certificate. Here is a sample. So we have his certificate preserved in the Manpoguji. So what it does is that it shows from the sixth patriarch Huineng, right, from my the left side, you can start with Huineng and one after another, showing a unbroken transmission from Huineng all the way down to Mi Yuanwu Fei Yin Tongrong. And the last line is Fei Yin Tongrong's writing. He said, hereby I transmit the Dharma to Yinyuan Longqi. Right, so this is considered to be certificate. So in that time, without this, just like a diploma, right, you're not finished, right? You're just PhD incomplete, right? But here, you want to complete, you need a certificate like this. So they brought this idea to Japan as well. So Japanese are crazy about this. So this is great. So we want that, right? So we want a certificate. And because he has certificate, right? So Japanese believed in him. So we need an authentic teacher. So no other than Yinyuan, so because he has a certificate, right? So in 1637, Yinyuan received the invitation from Huangbo, that's his local temple. He accepted the invitation, was installed officially as the third abbot of the revived Huangbo monastery after Mi Yuanwu. Since then, Yinyuan Longqi presided over Huangbo for about 16 years. Actually, he was abbot there for 16 years until 1654. So that's the year he left China, went to Japan, right? So here, let's look at Japan. So what happened? He arrived in Japan. Yinyuan arrived in Nagasaki. So this is trading port, very famous. Jesuit helped to build this town. So in the 1654, and joined the thriving Chinese community there. So there's already Chinese there. They're doing trade. So they live very well in Japan. So they have their own community. Around that time, the private trade between China and Japan in Nagasaki was booming. Because the Chinese community flourished, the Chinese residents in Japan need Chinese monks to provide religious services. In addition, the Japanese government also expect the Chinese residents to be registered with local Buddhist temples. For those who know early modern Japanese history, that's the time of closing down the country, right? Sogoku. The missionaries been expelled and the Christians been persecuted. Right? That's the time period. The Japanese government asked the foreign residents, Chinese residents, also Dutch. Dutch probably, they don't need to build a Buddhist temple, but the Chinese, right? So they asked Chinese to have their own temple, but they don't have monks. So that's why they invite monks from China. And Chinese immigrants, they found 3 temples, by the way. So I want to show these 3 temples. Today, if you visit Nagasaki, you can still go there, right? So it's quite interesting in Japan, very Chinese style. So for a long time, they have been occupied by Chinese monks. For a long time, become the center of Chinese communities in Nagasaki. Sofukuji, for example, represent, they all arrange, their identity is local identity, regional identity, representing a Chinese place. Sofukuji, for example, represent the Chinese from the Fuzhou area in Fujian. Kofukuji represent Chinese from Lower Yangtze region. Nanjing, for example, and Fukusaiji represent Chinese from Zhangzhou and the Quanzhou region in Fujian, right? The Fujian immigrants a lot. After just 1 year's residence in Nagasaki, Yinyuan was able to secure an invitation from Japanese monks and authorities to move to a Japanese temple called Mumonji, close to Osaka. So this is what is extraordinary. The Bakufu, which is a Japanese government, they restrict foreigners. They don't want them to go other places of Japan. Chinese, Nagasaki, right? Just stay there. Don't go anywhere. Dutch in the Tejima, right? So don't go anywhere. But you know, Yinyuan, that's Ingen. Why he was extraordinary, because he managed, right, to went outside Nagasaki in Osaka. So this is a significant move for Yinyuan, because the Japanese government did not allow ordinary Chinese residents living outside Nagasaki. After staying in Fumonji just for a couple of years, 6 years basically, Yinyuan was allowed to have 2 audiences, right? He met the head of the Japanese military government, the so-called shogun, in Bakufu, went to Edo. So that means he traveled to Edo, which is today's Tokyo. The 4th Tokugawa shogun, Tokugawa Ieyasu, actually, do I have? Okay, so I don't have his portrait here. Received him in the Edo Castle. The Edo Castle is today's Imperial Palace. So what happened after Meiji Ishin is that Japanese emperor moved from Kyoto to Tokyo, and they just took over the shogun's palace, right? And during the winter of 58. So this is Yinyuan, right? It's very impressive, very extraordinary. So the Japanese general, shogun officials love him so much, allow him to build the temples. So 2 years later, in 1660, Bakufu made an exception to allow him to build a new temple. This is Mampukuji, right? It's in Uji. So Uji, by the way, is also another famous place in Japan, right? So also tales of Genji, for example. That's nowadays, if you go to Uji, that's going to be the museum of the tales of Genji. But please stop by just one station, stop a train station before Uji. That's Ōbaku, right? It's very close, actually. So for the next 100 years, so this is another extraordinary kind of achievement. I don't know how Ingen managed to do that. So the Mampukuji, the Japanese government only allowed Chinese monks to be appointed as abbot, right, for the next 100 years. So when they have a vacancy, they went to China to invite a new Chinese monk, right, to be the abbot. So this stopped until 1784, right? So from 1661 to 1784. So you can see for about 100 years, 11 Chinese abbots have been appointed as an abbot, and they travel to Edo Castle every time when there's a kind of a new shogun, right, took office. So they have been invited. So they were quite significant, right? So in the political the circle of Edo Japan, right? And let me just talk a little bit about his influence in Japan, right? So it's no doubt he was influential at the time. In the heyday of his tradition, if you just count the number of his temple belong to the Ōbaku, that's about 1,200. So 1,200 temples in Japan. Right now it's about 400, right? About 400. The number is going down. So his Ōbaku tradition left a clear mark on modern Japanese Buddhism because the changes Ōbaku Zen brought to Japan. Yanagida Seisan, by the way, Venerable Dingming mentioned his name. This is a leading scholar. By the way, I have his name here. So he created this term called Ōbakunization, so basically making things Ōbaku. And so he wrote an article, evaluated the influences. I don't have time to read all of them, but just highlight some of his points. Number one is the transmission of Chinese culture during that time in Japan. So a lot of things happening. Buddhist canon, for example, Sueki-san already mentioned Buddhist canon by Tetsugen, so that's one significant tradition. And lots of Japanese monks at that time learned from the Chinese about Chan Buddhism, including the later Hyakuin, for example. So today's Rinzai Chan tradition in Japan very much inherited Hyakuin's legacy. So Hyakuin is a little bit was a little bit later than Ingen, but he criticized Ingen's practice. Second, let me see here. So we have a couple of names. So influence even Dogen. Right? Dogen is way before Ōbaku. But however, it's so ironic, Dogen's manuscript have been kept in the monastery. Nobody read it seriously, but only after the Chinese monk came, the Soto monks start to look at their own tradition. So they published Sobogenzo. Sobogenzo now is more like the canon of Soto Zen, right? So scholars translate that. So it's pretty important, but the appearance of this become popular is really after the Chinese monks arrive in Japan. And then Hyakuin I mentioned, so that's the Hyakuin, the Zen tradition, very much shaped today's Zen. That's the Zen tradition, Chinese influence. Second is the intellectual influence. I want to mention a couple of important figures in the Edo period. Ogyu Solai, for example. So he loved Chinese culture. He wanted to learn spoken Chinese, by the way. So this is when Chinese monks came to Edo, visit the shogun, he will find chance to practice colloquial Chinese, right? So how interesting. They were so crazy about colloquial Chinese at that time. And Yomegaku, so this is kind of a Japanese version of Wang Yangming's learning. I mentioned his name from the new Shaoxing area, right? So close to Hangzhou as well. The Mitogaku, right? So Mito is the Japanese domain, right? So they were famous for the political philosophy and Asian philosophy rhetoric, right? And also the national learning, right? So all these we can see the traces of the Chinese influence here. And also, right, so now we know the Sencha. So this is the Sencha tradition, right? By the way, Dr. James Buskin, also certified Sencha master, right? So he got certificate. So later we're going to hear from him and his performance, right? So for the Sencha tea ceremony. And so these are the famous kind of a tradition Sencha. And another example is the introduction of Ingen Mame, right? So James also mentioned this is kind of quite famous in Japan. People actually use that without knowing it, right? So I always test my Japanese friend, right? What is Ingen Mame? Do you know Ingen Mame? Yes, of course, but why is Ingen Mame, right? So nobody knows because Japanese nowadays, they don't write Chinese characters for Ingen, but katakana, right? So then I tell them this is Chinese monk, right? They were surprised. Bikkuri shimashita, right? That kind of a feeling, right? So that's my secret pleasure, right? Testing my Japanese friends. But anyway, so that's just the kind of evidence of his kind of influence, right? So now I want to shift to his Zen teachings. This is probably we care about. So we're talking about Zen teacher. Yes, we can talk about art, calligraphy, all those, but these are the peripheral, right? In religion, right? Seriously, we talk about religion, then that's about spirituality. about people's belief, right? So in the other world, in lots of different things, right? Including tea as well, right? So tea sounds like just a beverage, but for Zen Buddhism, it's spiritual, right? So, but why? So we need to explain why. So here I think we need to spend some time to think about what's he's teaching, what's really he taught us. So why was he influential? We look at his teaching and practice. And that his teaching is nothing new, actually, to the student of East Asian Buddhism. His Zen thought is based on a body of a rich Chan literature, such as recorded sayings, right? So I want to mention a couple of the tradition because he was not coming from nowhere. Right? Before him, there are many, many Chan teachers, right, before him. So he assimilated all this existing Chan tradition from the recorded sayings. So these were created during the Tang Dynasty, canonized during the Song Dynasty. So this Yulu or Goloku in Japanese are collections of Chan teachers' sermons, encounter dialogues between teacher and the disciples. If you know a little bit about Zen Buddhism, their way of training teaching is quite unique. So they rely on the encounter between teacher and disciple. So they hope to to be enlightenment in this movement, right? So not just static, sitting there reading, right, doing things, but they want to be more dynamic. So they develop this dynamic encounter dialogue kind of a training. And Yinyuan and his including his teacher disciples, they have revived that. And so he likes Rinzai Gaku, by the way, Rinzai Roku, Rinji's recorded saying. So this is one of the essential text in the Ōbaku Rinji tradition, right? By the way, I want to mention Dr. Albert Walter actually wrote a book of Rinji, right? And also we acquired a rare kind of a translation notes from the early 60s. I mean, United States, there are a couple of Ruth Sasaki, for example, and also a group of young, at that time, 60s, young Japanese scholars, right? Yeah, Elias says that. And also Sueki Sensei, they have a project to study the translation notes of Rinzai Roku as well. I mean, translation into English, right, from the Chinese version. So it's pretty important. So Yinyuan, he actually believed the recorded saying Rinzai Roku as a spiritual source for his teaching and practice. And in this record, people can see Chinese Chan masters often behave strangely during their encounter with students. They respond to students' question not directly, but with enigmatic actions such as beating and shouting. This kind of interaction was often written down as encounter dialogues. So this becomes the source of a koan studies. So if you know Chan or Zen study, you read those very short conversations, very, very pithy, and also thoughtful. That's coming from the encounter dialogue. So scholars often describe this style as iconoclastic because it's not conventional, and the antinomian, I think I have this written down as well. So you can imagine his Chan style is really strange, striking, right, shocking even. So for ordinary people, first time, you probably will be surprised when they did that. So now let's look at the Yinyuan's enlightenment experience, as I already mentioned. So this is quite unique. And for us, I think we don't have lots of descriptions about enlightened person, right? But here we have one record from his chronological biography. So this is a rare case for us because enlightenment experience represent what we call the higher consciousness or heightened consciousness. So this is what I came to the United States. I found people are crazy about consciousness, especially in the 60s, 70s, right? Psychedelic, right? So you even use drug, right? To help you to enhance that. So that's quite of a story, but why not study koan, right? So we study Zen Buddhism, we can have this as well. So Yinyuan's moment of enlightenment suddenly came in one morning in 1676 when he was 35 years old. So he was 35 years old. He was under supervision of a Chan master called Five Peaks. Five Peaks was a disciple of Mingyuan Wu. So one day he had an encounter dialogue with Five Peaks. When he saw Master Five Peaks, he immediately waved his hand. So he said, so wave his fist. right? So this way. Before his teacher Five Peaks and challenge him, knowing this, the world has peace. Knowing this, so there are two fists. You can imagine he was waving, right? He was waving. And how to solve this? Because obviously these two competing, right? So there are going to be contradictions. The Five Peaks ask, right? Where did you learn all this, right? As a teacher, questioning students. So there's no reply because Yinyuan just shout, right? He give a shout. So then the Five Peaks ask again, tell me again, right? So where you learned this? And Yinyuan shouted again, right? So no answer. And the Five Peaks then hit him, right? So there's the beating part. And Yinyuan shouted it twice in a row, and the Five Peaks replied with 2 strikes. And after all his fellow monks thought during this encounter, Yinyuan was defeated, right? So no positive result coming out of this encounter. After this event, Yinyuan was so frustrated that he began to behave very strangely. He walked angrily and without seeing anybody, without feeling the existence of his own body. He only came back to normal consciousness until the next morning when he heard the chiming sound of the bell in the monastery. The bell is chiming. So he heard that. Suddenly he felt enlightened. His hair stood on end all of a sudden, right? And his whole body began to sweat, and he completely illuminated his ultimate origin. The truth is crystal clear without duality and without distinction. He felt that this experience cannot be described to others with any possible examples. It can be only learned through self-realization. So this is quotation from his kind of recorded sayings. But if you study religion, especially the mysticism, for example, this is typical kind of a description of mysticism in the Western scholarship, right? So the more study can be done about what's really happening. So he knew he was enlightened. So but he has no way to tell people. This is called ineffable experience. So out of joy, he smiled to everybody he met. His smile must look so weird. His fellow monks even thought he was bewitched. And when he was asked to demonstrate his supreme understanding of a truth in front of everybody, he said, okay, so I'm going to demonstrate my enlightenment to you, right? But you will be scared, right? So I'm going to do that. But basically what he did is that he left the room by turning a somersault, right? So he just turned around, right? Left the room. So that's the encounter dialogue I'm referring to, and the enlightenment experience I'm referring to, right? So that's why he believed himself to be a real enlightened teacher, right? Student maybe at that time, but he was later recognized by his teacher, I said. So this is really important, right? So the 2 principles of success, right? I want to list them here because they are important. The first one is the principle is that the kind of a purity and authenticity, right? So this is important. So because his ability to perform koan and the enlightened encounter dialogue, and he and his disciples emphasized their teaching and practice were both authentic and orthodox, right? Remember, Linji did this, right? Right now, Master Yinyuan can do this as well, right? So that shows striking similarity, continuity with the tradition, the early patriarchs. So this become powerful for them to claim authenticity and orthodoxy. So because of this claim, they achieved the great success of attracting students' support from donors, not only in China, but also in Japan. They established their Dharma transmission on a monastic network. So meaning his disciples getting the Dharma transmission, they will occupy many, many different temples. They become abbot. So they form a monastic network, right? And so that's why, going back to my earlier slides, that's about the authentic transmission. Why they use the seal is very important. They stamp this in all the documents and calligraphy, art objects. And more important is that his teacher, Fei Yin Tongrong, he didn't go to Japan, by the way, but he was aware his disciple going to Japan. And Fei Yintong, by the way, was involved into a controversy because he wrote a book called Strict Transmission of 5 Chan Schools, the Wudeng Yentong, right, or Goto Gento, right? So earlier I showed this Japanese emperor's new title for Yinyuan that's called Gento. That's coming, we thought this may come from his teacher's work, right? So this work because bear the, in the title, Gento, into the title. So it may be meaningful, but we don't know. So there's no explanation why Japanese emperor, the imperial house agency chose this name, right? So maybe that's a kind of a further kind of a research for us. So then the second principle here is about authenticity of a Chan lineage rely on the strict definition of Dharma transmission. I show you a certificate. It is important because at that time they want to fight with 2 bad practices, right? So they want to establish good practice, but something is bad. One is called transmission by proxy. Let me see. Okay, so I have it here, right? Transmission by proxy, which means you have no encounter between teacher and disciple. But on behalf, for example, Dr. Walter is here. On behalf of Dr. Walter, I give PhD to somebody else, right? So this is this kind of a transgression of the internal power structure. So that's not allowed in this tradition. And also remote inheritance, right? So you can't claim yourself as descendant from Linji. Even you have similarities in your teaching and practice, you need a certificate from a previous teacher who have this lineage, right, before you continuously, right? So that's how Yinyuan set up his tradition and the lineage. So this basically is a rationalization of Dharma transmission, and he used these 2 principles to organize monks and the monastery into a hierarchical structure. It's a hierarchy, right? You can imagine that. So that becomes important and explains success of his tradition in Japan, right? Because it's real institutionalization. In China, however, it's very loose, right? It remains very loose, right? Okay, so let's go quickly to his practice, right? So I think he have this balanced program here. So if we read his recorded sayings and poems closely, he actually quite conventional. So I would say traditional, not appear to be very radical, right? Because he beat people, shout, But however, go down to the practice, he is actually very down to earth. So he read scriptures, for example, to Thargatagarbha. So this is one of the essential East Asian Buddhist teaching. He follows that, no problem. And the scriptures he read very well, the Awakening of Faith, Srangam Sacha, Leng Yan Jing. So these were often appeared. And he believed in the pure mind, right? So these are quite conventional. So I didn't see any trace in the real actual practice. He advocated something antinomian or unconventional. So the ultimate goal of his teaching was to enable his students to reach enlightenment, right? So this is quite kind of a normal. And he respect the Buddhist canon. I want to skip this part, although I have a lot to talk about. I added couple of books about Buddhist canon as well. I'm undertaking a project actually studying the Ōbaku canon, right? Supported by the Jiang Jingguo Foundation. I went to DC last week to do research in Library of Congress, for example, right? So I want to skip, so just a couple of pictures about the canon. So they're still there. Wood blocks, Mampukuji. So I visited there before. So let me go quickly about the slides. Faith in Buddhism, that's remain important, right? He believes in all this different kind of faith. He want to cultivate the faith in Buddhism by his example. And at the end, quickly, I want to just mention the artistic achievement, because that's going to be the focus of online exhibition, calligraphy, for example, right? So no additional words about these, because in online exhibition and also later lectures, we're going to have more. And also portrait painting. So because it emphasized the transmission, so then the portrait is really important. That represents the power, right? Patriarchal power. Right? You need portrait to show the power coming through the image, right? So that's why we call this exhibition true image, right? So now you know where the truths come from, right? Okay, so these different portraits, same figures, not just one, but many, many different kind of portraits. And Dr. Betsy Scharf is absolutely an expert in this. We're going to hear more from her. And other thing, material culture. So this is something I want to mention, including chair, for example, this wholesale kind of importation of the Ming Dynasty culture at that time. Sculpture, for example, teapots, for example, right? So Ōbaku tea ceremony, they have their own teapot. And a wooden fish, for example, today in China, if you visit China, similar kind of instrument, right? It can be found in Japan as well, right? The poetic, so I just want to mention quickly because here we're in Poetry Center, right? So to make our host happy, so we have poetry available, and he wrote all kinds of different categories, and that becomes a subject matter, right? So at the end, I want to mention his love of Mount Fuji, right? He never climbed on the top, but he had traveled from Tokaido. At that time, that's the main highway connecting Kyoto and Tokyo. So basically, this is what he wrote. So this has been polished by my friend Bill Potter, called Red Pine. So he's really an accomplished translator of East Asian poems. So he helped me polish this translation. So this is what Ingen, he wrote about us both with white hair and me old besides. Facing each other, we think the same thought. I would say something deep, but I have nothing to say. I'm relying on you to keep this going forever. This means his transmission in Japan. So this shows he just tried to compare himself with Mount Fuji because they're old, white hair. So that's the similarity here, right? So his tradition continued to flourish, by the way, after the passing away of Yinyuan. So there are Chinese masters I mentioned in Mount Fuji for about more than 100 years. Chinese monks keep coming from China to Japan, invited by the Japanese government. So they were the abbot. So I have a list of names here. And once again, I want to go back to our exhibition, right? Remember, we have an exhibition going on. So this is quite significant for us. The full title is A True Image, Celebrating the Legacy of Yinyuan Longqi and the Art of Ōbaku, right? So please visit our website. Once again, I listed here, ingen.arizona.edu, right? So, and also in the future lectures in the fall, we're going to have more colleagues coming to Tucson, either in person or online, to elaborate further on his contribution in calligraphy, portrait painting, tea ceremony, right? So stay tuned. So at the end, I want to thank our donor once again, Wanfu Monastery in Fuqing, China. And recently, Wanfu Temple has been completely rebuilt and revitalized under the leadership of Venerable Dingming. So Venerable Dingming mentioned I'm his old friend. It's truly old because this is before he became the abbot. So we have no idea he later will become the abbot, but I already know him pretty well. So at that time, he was a kind of a researcher in Beijing in the Buddhist Research Institute, right? So it's now a beautiful place, become a new center of a spiritual cultural transformation. We anticipate a bright future for Yinyuan's tradition in both China and Japan. Yinyuan passed away 350 years ago. When we look back and examine his teaching and practice, we can still feel he is talking to us and asks us to think about these important questions. Who are we? What is the relation between us and the world? What is the meaning of enlightenment? How to live an enriched human life spiritually, culturally, and artistically? To answer these questions, more studies need to be done about Yinyuan and his Ōbaku tradition. Thank you very much for your attention. Yeah.
Okay, so that was the main course, and everybody here has had, I'm sure, intellectually, artistically, a feast. So now we can appeal to your gastronomic needs as well. Thank you again for showing up. It was a very fruitful launching ceremony today, and please help yourself to some refreshments outside, and thank you again.